Let's stop pretending you didn't hear God clearly. Because deep down you already know, you just haven't moved. You've prayed, you've fasted, you've journaled, you've asked friends for counsel. And yet, despite all the clarity you've been given, you're still circling the same question. Is this really the person God has for me? But clarity isn't your problem. Fear is. It's not confusion you're wrestling with. It's discomfort. It's the fear of choosing wrong, the fear of surrendering control, the fear of being fully seen, and maybe fully disappointed. That fear disguises itself well. It can sound like wisdom. I'm just being cautious. I want to be sure. I'm still discerning. But at some point, discernment becomes a defense mechanism, a way to avoid risk, a way to delay obedience without calling it disobedience. And if we're being honest, fear has less to do with this person and more to do with what this relationship will require of you. Commitment, vulnerability, accountability, all of that forces you to show up differently. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. From a psychological perspective, fear thrives in uncertainty, but it also thrives in responsibility. The minute you really decide, you shift from passively evaluating to actively building. That's a transition most people aren't emotionally prepared for. Because now it's not just about what if they're not the one. It's what if I fail in this? What if you finally have the right person, but you still mess it up? That's the internal conflict. We want the reward of love, but not the exposure of it. Because love uncovers. It doesn't let you hide behind curated versions of yourself. And that's terrifying, especially if you've been hurt before. So instead of moving forward with the person you know God has confirmed, you pause. You freeze, and you start looking for another sign, one that feels safer, one that doesn't demand quite so much. But God isn't in the business of indulging our fear. He's in the business of transforming it. And sometimes he'll confirm the same thing over and over, not because he's unsure, but because you are. And even in that, he's patient. But his patience is not permission to keep avoiding what you've already been told. Philosophically, clarity demands responsibility. Once you know the truth, you're accountable to it. That's why some people resist it. It's easier to keep asking God for more signs than to say yes to the one he's already given. But let's get something straight. Divine confirmation is not designed to eliminate all uncertainty. It's not meant to make the journey painless. It's meant to anchor you when fear shows up, because it will show up. Even in right relationships, even with the right person, there will be moments of doubt, of stretching, of emotional resistance. That doesn't mean God didn't speak. It just means you're human. And commitment always invites fear to the table. It just doesn't let it lead. You keep waiting for the fear to go away before you act. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move anyway. And when God has made something clear, that's the moment you stop negotiating and start obeying. That's how clarity works. It confronts you. And then it calls you forward. So stop calling what is actually fear discernment. Stop asking for a clearer voice when God has already spoken in stereo. The question is no longer, did I hear God? The question is, am I willing to trust what I heard? Because clarity isn't your obstacle. Your comfort zone is. At a certain point, you have to admit it. You're not waiting on God. You're just not moving. And we've gotten really good at hiding passivity under the language of spirituality. I'm waiting for confirmation. I'm waiting for peace. I'm waiting for the right time. But the truth, God has confirmed the person, given the green light, and opened the door. What you're doing now is waiting for certainty, not instruction. And those aren't the same thing. Let's break it down. Spiritually speaking, God doesn't repeat himself for entertainment. If he keeps confirming the same person to you, it's not because he's trying to convince himself, it's because he's trying to convince you to stop second-guessing him. This isn't about a lack of signs, it's about a lack of surrender. Because surrender means moving even when you don't feel 100% in control. It means trusting that obedience is enough, even when emotion lags behind. Psychologically, we know that hesitation often masquerades as wisdom. There's actually a name for analysis paralysis. The more information you get, the more overwhelmed your brain becomes. You're caught in a loop, gathering, questioning, evaluating, when what you really need is to act. The human mind finds comfort in preparation because it delays risk. It convinces you that as long as you're planning, you're progressing. But there comes a point where too much planning becomes emotional procrastination. It feels productive, but it's not. You're not being careful, you're being afraid. And while fear isn't a flaw, it becomes a problem when it rules your decisions. At some point, faith must override your instinct to stall. Faith isn't passive. It's not a waiting room where you sit until all your emotions align. It's action based on conviction. It's movement based on trust. If God has made it clear who your spouse is, then continuing to wait for more confirmation is no longer discernment. It's resistance. And here's where the philosophical tension comes in. We've been trained to believe that good decisions always come with good feelings. But that's not always true. Some of the best decisions you'll ever make will come with fear in your chest and questions in your mind. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them real. Love, marriage, covenant, they aren't guaranteed to come wrapped in emotional certainty. They require risk. And risk always feels unsafe to a heart that's been hurt before. But ask yourself, what exactly are you waiting for? A voice from heaven, a peace that erases every trace of fear, a moment where all doubt disappears. Because if that's your standard, you'll keep waiting forever. Peace isn't always a feeling. Sometimes it's a knowing. A quiet, stubborn conviction that says, this is the person, this is the direction. It's time. And once that conviction is there, hesitation becomes a liability. Because the longer you delay obedience, the more you invite doubt to take root. Let's be honest, delay doesn't protect you. It just postpones purpose. And the longer you sit in indecision, the more room you give your fears to shape the narrative. That's not faith, that's control. And control might feel safe, but it never leads to transformation. God never asked you to feel ready. He asked you to trust what He told you. So no, you're not waiting on God. You're avoiding the risk of faith. And deep down, you know it. You've heard clearly. The door is open. The invitation is on the table. Now it's your move, because faith doesn't just wait, it walks. Let's get to the root of it. Overthinking isn't always about being thorough. Sometimes overthinking is disobedience in disguise. It's you saying, I need more time, when you've already been given what you need. You're not processing, you're stalling. And there's a point where constantly analyzing what God already confirmed becomes a subtle form of rebellion. It's not loud, it's not defiant, it's quiet, logical, justified. But it's still resistance. We've confused analysis with wisdom. We assume that if we keep digging, we'll feel more certain. If we replay every conversation, study every flaw, compare every option, maybe then it will feel safer to choose. But that's not how faith works. At some point, you're not seeking clarity, you're avoiding responsibility. You want to keep thinking about the thing so you don't have to act on it. That's the comfort zone of the overthinker, always preparing, never risking. Psychologically, overthinking is a coping mechanism. It gives you the illusion of control. The mind loops, replays, questions, not because it needs more information, but because it doesn't trust what it already knows. It's your brain trying to protect you from pain, uncertainty, or regret. But here's the problem. That same mechanism that shields you from discomfort also blocks you from intimacy. Because real connection requires commitment. And commitment doesn't wait for perfect data, it moves with conviction. And that's the crossroads you're at. You've heard God, you felt peace. You've seen confirmation after confirmation. But instead of aligning your steps, you've kept circling the decision. Maybe out of fear of choosing wrong. Maybe out of fear of being seen, vulnerable, known. Maybe because you've made mistakes before and you promised yourself you'd never move too fast again. I get that. But overcorrecting out of fear isn't wisdom. It's just a different kind of disobedience. Still slow. Still calculated. Still misaligned with God's timing. Philosophically, overthinking becomes dangerous when it replaces obedience. When the pursuit of absolute certainty keeps you from acting on what God already made clear, you're no longer being led by truth. You're being led by fear masked as rationality. You want a guarantee. But here's the thing, love doesn't come with one. Faith doesn't come with one. Even divine confirmation doesn't eliminate all doubt. It just anchors you when the doubt starts talking. Let's be honest, your overthinking isn't bringing you peace. It's draining you. Every day you delay, you're more anxious, more mentally exhausted, more uncertain. That's not wisdom. That's a feedback loop. And what breaks that loop isn't more thinking, it's movement. It's a decision. One that says, I trust what God showed me more than I trust my fears. You've been praying for God to speak, and He did. You've been asking for signs, and He sent them. repeatedly. But God won't compete with your obsession to control every variable. He speaks clearly, but he doesn't shout over your doubt. At some point, you have to stop asking, what if I'm wrong? And start asking, what if I'm right? And I keep delaying anyway. You're not protecting yourself by overthinking. You're just postponing the life you've already been called into. That person God keeps highlighting, that's not an accident. That's intentional. And your refusal to act isn't about waiting for wisdom. It's about resisting responsibility. So here's the challenge: stop analyzing the assignment. Start walking in it. Because the more you overthink, the more you under trust. Let's clear something up. Confirmation does not mean ease. Just because God has confirmed someone as your spouse doesn't mean the relationship will be effortless. That's a myth. A dangerous one. We have this false belief that divine alignment equals emotional comfort, constant peace, and friction-free love. But the truth is, God's confirmation doesn't eliminate the process, it initiates it. His confirmation is not your escape from difficulty. It's your green light to engage with it differently. We want miracles without the mess. We want the one without the work. But marriage, real covenant-level connection, requires more than compatibility. It requires maturity, patience, emotional resilience, and spiritual discipline. So when you ask for confirmation, what you're really asking for is clarity on who you're supposed to build with. But building is still work. And just because the blueprint is right doesn't mean you're exempt from the effort. Psychologically, there's a pattern we see in people who have a high fear of failure or rejection. They chase certainty as a way to avoid vulnerability. That shows up in relationships when someone thinks, if this is really from God, then I shouldn't feel this insecure, or we shouldn't be arguing, or this shouldn't feel hard. But that's not how human dynamics function. You're not marrying an idea. You're partnering with a complex, evolving person. They have triggers, blind spots, trauma, and habits just like you. God didn't confirm their perfection. He confirmed their purpose with you. So stop using friction as a sign that you measured. Stop interpreting every disagreement as a red flag. Spiritual confirmation does not mean emotional insulation. It means you now have divine permission and responsibility to do the work that love demands. Let's go a little deeper. Philosophically, we tend to resist tension because we associate struggle with misalignment. But often, tension is where transformation begins. The best relationships stretch you. They expose the parts of you that still need healing. They require you to grow, not just in how you love someone else, but in how you confront your own weaknesses. So if you're in a season where the person God confirmed is triggering your insecurities, pushing your buttons, or forcing you to mature, it doesn't mean they're wrong for you. It might mean they're exactly right. Here's the truth: no one tells you confirmation isn't the finish line. It's the starting point. It gives you the direction, not the destination. You still have to learn how to communicate, how to trust, how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to hold space for each other's evolution. You still have to show up every day and choose them, not because it's always easy, but because you heard clearly and decided to build from that conviction. And yes, you'll have doubts along the way, not because the person isn't right, but because growth is uncomfortable. And when you grow, the relationship shifts. It deepens. It requires recommitment. That's not dysfunction. It's development. You're becoming who you need to be for the relationship God already said was yours. So don't panic when the process gets messy. Don't assume confirmation means God is going to eliminate every obstacle. What he promised is presence, not perfection. What he gave you is alignment, not autopilot. You still have to walk this out day by day, decision by decision, because confirmation isn't a shortcut. It's a call to build with intention. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck after receiving confirmation from God is this subtle but powerful belief there might be someone better. Maybe someone who fits your list more perfectly, someone who looks more like your fantasy, or someone who doesn't bring up your insecurities the way this person does. That line of thinking may sound logical, but let's be clear, it's not wisdom. It's fear wrapped in entitlement. It's not discernment, it's indecision being fueled by a fear of missing out. This is where your psychology starts to work against you. When you're faced with a decision that requires risk, the brain starts scanning for all possible escape routes. What if I didn't hear God clearly? What if I'm settling? What if there's someone else coming next year, someone with fewer complications? That's not clarity, that's anxiety. And the more you indulge it, the more it chips away at your ability to trust your own discernment. You spiral. Not because the answer isn't clear, but because you've made space for fantasy to overtake faith. Let's go even deeper. The fear of missing out, what psychologists call FOMO, is rooted in a scarcity mindset. It tells you there's never enough, not enough love, not enough options, not enough time. And so when God places someone in front of you and confirms that repeatedly, the scarcity mindset doesn't rejoice. It doubts. Because in scarcity, contentment feels like a risk. You become so obsessed with what else might exist that you dismiss what's already been given. You start treating what's sacred like it's optional, and that's a dangerous place to be. God doesn't call you to choose from fear. He calls you to recognize what he's already revealed. But you can't do that if your heart is still tethered to the illusion of something more glamorous, more impressive, or more ideal. What you've been shown may not match your fantasy, but it matches your future. And that's more important. Because fantasy doesn't raise a family. Fantasy doesn't grow through adversity. Fantasy doesn't build covenant. The person God confirmed may not look how you imagined, but they carry the capacity to grow with you. And that's something a better option can't manufacture. Philosophically, this comes down to the difference between desire and design. Desire wants what feels good now. Design aligns with long-term purpose. And if you're honest, some of what you've been waiting on isn't confirmation. It's chemistry. It's emotional comfort. And while those things have value, they don't replace divine instruction. God didn't ask you to feel like this is your spouse. He asked you to believe what he confirmed and build from that foundation. Your feelings will fluctuate. Your preferences may shift. But design stays constant. You're not looking for a flawless human being. You're looking for the one whose life assignment complements yours. Who challenges you to grow? Who aligns with your values and who's willing to do the hard work of becoming? Not just someone who looks the part on paper. So don't let hypothetical better steal what's already yours. You're not missing out on something greater by choosing what God has shown you. You're actually stepping into something deeper. The truth is, you already have the answer. The person has been revealed. The signs have been clear. But as long as you entertain the question, what if there's someone better? You'll stay emotionally unavailable to what's real. Because when God confirms someone, your fear of missing out is just a distraction from what you've already found. At some point, you have to stop circling the same question and move. You've prayed, journaled, fasted, replayed conversations, and asked for confirmation again and again, and God, in his patience, gave it. Not once, not twice, over and over. But still, you hesitate. You stay in neutral while waiting for a level of certainty that, deep down, you already have. It's not because God is unclear. It's because you're afraid of the weight that comes with obedience. And here's the truth that cuts delayed obedience is still disobedience. There's this subtle lie that waiting doesn't cost you anything, as if time spent discerning is somehow neutral. But it's not. Every moment you delay a response to God's voice, something is being affected. Someone is being affected. There's a ripple effect to hesitation, even when it feels justified. The confirmation you received wasn't just about who you're supposed to be with. It was about timing, momentum, alignment. And when you hesitate, you don't just delay romance, you delay purpose, you delay growth. You delay the healing that happens in the relationship, not before it. Psychologically, the mind can rationalize delay as wisdom. We call it making sure or being cautious, when in fact, it's often avoidance in disguise. The deeper fear isn't always about the other person. It's about you. What will stepping into this commitment require of you? What version of yourself will you have to shed? What level of responsibility will you have to carry? And so instead of moving forward, you hover. You pray, but you don't act. You listen, but you don't shift, but you don't go. That internal pause may feel safe, but it comes at a cost, because every delayed yes becomes space for doubt to multiply. The longer you avoid the step, the harder it becomes to take it. Your conviction starts eroding under the weight of indecision, and before long, what was once clear becomes cloudy. Not because God changed his mind, but because you stayed too long in hesitation. And the mind will eventually rewrite the narrative to protect your ego from regret. That's how disobedience becomes justified slowly, logically, quietly. Philosophically, obedience isn't just about rule, following. It's about alignment. You're aligning your internal reality with divine truth, even when your emotions haven't caught up yet. You're saying, I trust God's clarity more than my craving for comfort. And yes, obedience often costs your comfort. It costs the illusion of control. But it unlocks something you don't access any other way: movement with God. The power of alignment is not just in being right, it's in being ready. And readiness doesn't mean you feel 100% confident. It means you're willing to move despite discomfort. That's faith. That's maturity. That's spiritual and emotional responsibility. Because when God confirms something, especially someone, it's not an invitation to overanalyze, it's an invitation to obey. You're not being called to perfection. You're being called to progress. So if you're still sitting on the edge of this decision, waiting for a level of ease that may never come, let me say this clearly: God already answered you. He doesn't need to say it again. You don't need another sign. You need to trust what you heard, remember who said it, and act like you believe it. Because while God is patient, his timing is still sacred. And your delay can't keep interrupting the flow of his will. Move. Not because you feel fully ready, but because he already said it's time.